Hunting by Stars, Chapter 30. The Way Home, Rose. Rose remembered her grandma's house on the res. It was small, just a kitchen that opened onto a small living room, a bedroom with a twin bed, and a dresser with broken drawers, and a tiny bathroom that consistently smelled like bleached outhouse. The front mudroom was always crammed with boots, snowsuits, toboggans, and hunting gear. On the back porch was a stack of plastic chairs that sat under snow for months at a time, and a round table rusted to leaning. There was a huge backyard her grandma refused to mow until one cousin or another dragged a mower up the dirt road and did it for her, while she glared at them from the sliding doors. "All those flowers chopped up so I can have a golf course," she'd mutter, "and I don't golf, me." But Rose loved that backyard. She even built a small fort back there out of old wood pallets steadied against the gnarled trunk of an apple tree. Out there she could be alone. No smaller cousins popping at her knees like corn. No res dogs snouting her hands for scraps. No grown-ups pestering her to get something or do something or say something. But to reach it, first she had to get down the steps from the deck. They were rickety and wide, and the railing had long since rotted off. So she'd positioned her bum at the top and slowly descend, stretching each little leg out to touch the next step before carefully lowering herself onto it. This approach was a double-edged sword, since underneath the deck was the most terrifying place on earth, damp and cold even in August. It housed sharp hedge trimmers long abandoned, antlers and skulls her great-uncles never got around to mounting, the skeleton of a snowmobile from the 70s, and boxes that had melted into a kind of tan flesh sculpture near the back. One summer, her mother surprised her with a satellite dish, and Rose stayed inside for 2 whole months. During this time of discovering real horrors on late-night movies and from reality TV, just how big and stupid the world actually was, she grew 4 whole inches. So by the time she was dragged to her grandmother's house for a dinner to celebrate the new school year, everything looked different. She kissed her granny hello, now having to stoop to reach her head, and slipped out onto the back deck before she could be put to work. Suddenly the stairs looked like stairs, surmountable, unremarkable. No one had managed to cut the grass in a while, so it was up and out in all of its wild glory. The stairs were not to be feared. They weren't actually scary, like the zombies she'd watched ripping into scalps, or the crooked cops she'd seen chasing the good guys into old factories. So she positioned her newly elongated feet at the top of and stepped like a normal person. No more climbing on her hands and her butt. She was past all that. But the first step never rose to meet her feet. She underestimated the distance and faltered before she could find purchase, pitching her upper body off balance, and then she was in the air. Every place her bones could connect with the splintered wood, they did. They smashed her cheek, her shoulder, her ribs, her tailbone. It was like a slow-motion blast from a shotgun, each pellet finding its mark with heat and sting. After what seemed like an excruciating amount of time, she lay at the bottom, gasping through bruised ribs for air, trying to keep the tears from coming before her breath did. No one had seen her fall, so no one came, and maybe that was better, because the thing that hurt her the most was the humiliation, the shock of it all. She wasn't past a slow climb after all. Thinking she was safe when it was clear she was still vulnerable broke her to pieces. She was breathless. That's what it felt like in the days after they ran into the nurses, walking back into the camp without French, knowing that she would never be with him again. Even now, Derek was filling the council in on the truth of it, that the French they'd lost was dead and that the new kind of predator was out in the woods wearing his skin. She hadn't considered that they wouldn't get him back, not for one moment, not when he'd been taken, not even when she'd been strapped to a cot being drained of blood. There wasn't one moment she hadn't thought about finding him, holding him, surrendering to the truth of how she felt about him. And now she was breathless. There was only one place she could imagine being, only one place left in the world that could hold her together. "Where's my family?" Clarence glanced at Bullet and stepped toward her. "Listen, my girl, things have changed since you were gone." Where are they? She couldn't listen anymore. She needed them, Mig and the twins and even Wob. They would know how to put her back together. "Rose, they had to leave. We got word that Wob was in imminent danger, so they—" "No, not this. Not now." She dropped her bag by the cave and took off running to their campground. "Rose!" Derek shouted after her. She didn't falter for a second, running as hard as she could, pushing past startled kids and quiet couples, not even noticing the empty circles on the ground and bundled belongings where people had started packing up. She heard footfalls behind her and was determined to outrun them. She had to get there. She couldn't be alone for one more second. She wouldn't make it without Mig telling her she'd be okay. That was the only thing she needed to hear. She burst into a clearing, her chest lifting and falling with the demand for air. She put her hands on her knees and swallowed hard, finally taking in her surroundings. Nothing, not one tent, fire pit buried, branches moved back to cover any signs of occupation. She spun. Had she gone the wrong way? Then Derek was behind her. Rose, they left. They had to leave. He pushed out between heavy breaths. Had to get Wob across the border. What are you saying? She got in his face. What the hell are you saying? Where's my goddamn family? He looked away and then back into her face. He wouldn't let her down, not now. He'd tell her the truth, no matter how much it hurt her. He would always tell her the truth. They're gone. It's just us now. Watching her unravel was harder than he had ever imagined it could be, because there was nothing he could do to make it stop. She just lay there at the bottom of someplace dark, feeling every sore spot on her body all at once. They had to go, Clarence explained. The nurses were here, and the time was right, but they didn't leave you. The rest of us waited for you to come back. That's the only reason they agreed to leave, so they could make the arranged pickup. Rose didn't answer him. She just stared straight ahead, somewhere over the low fire, a blanket wrapped up over her shoulders. Nam sat quietly on her other side, holding a mug of tea in case she needed a sip. Derek had brought her to the council meeting area. He thought she'd feel better being by the lodge, huddled in the corner of the space like a sleeping child under layers of blankets. And she did, but not all the way through. There were parts of her that remained untouched, unreachable. She wasn't sure they would ever open up again. They know about French? Her voice was monotone. They think he's dead. We all did until Derek told us about the nurses at the school. Our informant told us his name was off the register, so we assumed the worst. Being dead is not the worst. Being a traitor is. Rose, they didn't want to go without you, Bullet interjected. It killed them not to be able to wait. They almost didn't go, but they had to for the sake of the baby. They made the nurses leave instructions, directions, even though it's against network rules. Instructions, she sneered, so I can try to find them again on my own? Meg said if anyone could do it, it would be you, Bullet offered. She looked to Nam, beseeching, as if Nam could help here. They just looked at their feet, still unsure of their place. Ha! They didn't think I'd make it back. That's not true. Jean limped into the light. Not at all. They knew if anyone could get my boy back, it would be you, and they always knew you'd return. Everyone at the fire jumped. They hadn't heard him approach. They'd already decided not to share the news of Frenchie's resurrection and defection to the school army with him. If his son's death hadn't killed him, then this surely would. Bullet paid attention to the way he moved to see if he had overheard. I knew it, too. Knew you were a fighter the second you showed up. He smiled at her. His demeanor was calm, focused on making the girl feel better. There was no way he'd overheard the traitor part. And you know, my girl, you don't have to go. You can stay here with us. I always wanted a daughter. This touched Rose. She hadn't been anyone's daughter for so long, hadn't worn that title since she was a little girl, before her parents were hauled away, and she was left hiding from recruiters in her grandmother's backyard. She'd hidden so well that it wasn't until early the next morning that her great-uncle Jake found her while sneaking to his sister's house through the back. Holy hell, he yelled, hand over his heart when her face appeared from between pallets. You scared the piss right out of me. What are you doing? She could do nothing but cry. It was the last time she'd shed tears until the day Minerva had died. Now it seemed like she couldn't stop crying. When would things just stop so she could go back to the luxury of not crying? The truth was, she was the only one who could make it stop. She had to find a way to be at least okay, if not happy, or she would never stop. She would die, a dehydrated girl floating in a pool of her own tears. Nam moved closer so that Rose felt their leg against her own. This community is big, bigger than I can remember seeing. Rose nodded, sniffling. If we stay, I think it could work. They watched as Rose wiped tears from her cheeks. Oh, yeah? She cleared her throat. I mean, no one ever questioned me, Nam continued. They just shook my hand. Well, why would they say anything? Anyone would be glad to have you in their family. Rose looked at Nam for the first time since they'd sat down. You're my family, Rose. You. They put their hand over Rose's, and she grasped it. They sat in silence. Time did what it did best, slipped by regardless. One by one, people went to bed. Eventually, even Nam left to pass out in the cave on the small pile of blankets one of the women had prepared for them. And then it was just Rose and Derek sitting side by side under a sky exploding with stars so that all the ancestors sat waiting for what would come next. Rose, we need to talk. Derek's voice was low but a bit shaky. I don't want to upset you. You have to promise not to get upset. Derek, I don't think I have any energy left to be upset. She was solemn, kept her head down, and didn't even raise a hand to bat away the loose hair by her face. I want you to think seriously about what Jean said. He paused, choosing his words carefully so as not to spook her into flight. How about staying with us? I don't belong here. You do. This brought him to his feet. How could she even think that? Of course you do. You did from the moment you showed up. I showed up with my family. She stood now as well, slower than him but steadier too. I belong with them. Do you because they left without you? It was too far. He flinched from his own words as soon as they left his mouth. I'm sorry, but it's true. I would never leave you. The last part was quite bashful. I know, you do. She nodded, and he caught his breath. I would literally do anything for you, Rose. Hell, I would follow you through the woods with a bear trap stuck to my leg if that's what you wanted. He laughed, and she smiled. And for a moment, she even looked up, watching his mouth, while the laughter fell out. She could almost see it, like thin smoke lifting toward a canopy of stars, an offering to those who watched over them. It made her feel lighter, like maybe she could lift too. He got softer now that he'd broken through. Do you want to keep chasing ghosts, or do you want to fight these bastards from the safety of a good home, your own home? We're going to leave here and find a new spot, and you can help build it from the beginning, so it can be exactly what you want. Derek felt like a salesman trying to pitch this idea. She didn't answer, so he kept going. Silence was too heavy. Silence was too close to a no. Aren't you tired of running? He was getting panicked. He could hear it in his voice, so he took a breath to slow down. I know you carried a torch for French, but he's gone now, for good. There's no rescue mission that's going to bring him back from where he's at. I don't mean to be an ass, but that's the truth. We tried, we really did, but he didn't try back, not hard enough anyway. Her shoulders curled in a bit under the weight of those words. He leaned toward her, close enough that he could hear the air that Slouch pushed out. Rose, it's okay. Maybe not now, but it will be, and I'm willing to wait until you truly understand that. I will wait for as long as it takes. I'm in, totally in. For every minute you are sad or angry, you want to claw the bark off a tree, and maybe even the times you're happy enough to smile, I'm in, and better yet, I'm the one who's already here. He reached a shaking hand across the new distance between them. I can wait, I promise. You're worth every minute, however long it takes. Derek, he cut her off. You know how I feel about you. Christ, everyone knows how I feel about you. I'm not exactly subtle, you know? He dropped his hands against his thigh. And I know I can be a lot, but you and I, we're a good team. We're amazing out there, weren't we? She nodded, slow to make the time to think. And we can keep being a good team. But for that to happen, you gotta stay with me. Please stay with me. He tried to exhale, but the air hitched up in his throat. And that was it. He was done asking. Now it was her turn to give an answer, and she wasn't sure she had one, not one that she could bear to hear herself say out loud. She remembered him in the bush, how he took care of her when she couldn't take care of herself. She remembered lying beside him in the tent, pretending to still be asleep so she could enjoy the weight of his arm over her. She remembered the dream she had where they were strung together like Christmas lights. She knew how she felt when she was around, like everything might just work out, like she was safe. She just wasn't ready to say the words. She took a breath and for the first time in weeks looked him directly in the eye. She had an answer.